I'd like to just quickly introduce our next speaker, Dr. Matthew McDougall from Sino Group, and he's going to speak, from Sinotech, beg your pardon about that, and he's done a lot of research in this area and will share his knowledge with us. Please welcome him to the stage.
So firstly, it's good to be here. One, because I'm from Beijing, and it's about -10. So to come to Darwin to wear shorts for the first time in 10 years is fantastic. And the second thing, to be able to speak English in quite a fast way is fantastic. Because normally I'm having to speak very slowly, and it's just not in my personality. So I'm going to speak quite quickly today because it's just a real treat. And I'm going to talk about some interesting stuff about social media and the role of social media, particularly talking to Chinese, because as we've heard over the last day or so, the eastern area is where a lot of inbound are going to be coming from. And I guess a few of you might be interested in then how do you talk to those Chinese tourists in a way that they'll appeal and bring them down here. So I'm going to share that stuff with you today. We're going to talk about the Chinese internet landscape. We're going to talk about social media, and I'm going to give you a few tips. A few things to consider. Before I launch into my presentation, who's using social media today for their business? Anybody? Facebook pages, Twitter, right? Okay. So a little bit about me. So I've been in China 10 years now. I'm not Chinese. So just happened to turn up there one day and think it was a good place. The other thing is I've done a lot of work in terms of helping tourism. So they call me a tourism marketer, a destination marketer. What we refer to ourselves now as social influencers, because as a consultant we can charge a little bit more money. So today I'm here as a social influencer. And social media is impacting tourism, not just tourism from outbound from China, but tourism everywhere in the world. That's the reason most of you are now using this thing called Facebook, or using this thing called Twitter. So you may be surprised that in our country, China, where I live, we don't have this thing called Twitter. We don't have this thing called Facebook. YouTube is inaccessible. And yet, you've probably all got these things like Facebook and Twitter, and they're not doing anything for you. So we have these things called Sina Weibo, Renren, Kaixin, Douban, and names that are probably very, very foreign to you. So I talk about the universe and this parallel thing called the Chinese web. So these are what you're familiar with, and yet the Chinese government has deemed them inappropriate, and they've replaced by this new ecosystem. Logos that you guys have probably never heard of, and yet they probably have more users than certainly certain parts of the world have in total. So just a couple of fast facts to amaze you. So in China today, there's 513 million people connected on the internet. And that's about a 42% penetration rate. And they predict by the end of this year, we'll be up to 600 million people online. Phenomenal. In terms of time on site, time on usage per day, 1 billion minutes. Now, most of those are my staff browsing. We've got about 250 million blog users. And something that's probably very interesting is this year there'll be more Chinese content than English content on the internet. Wow. You guys here, you don't even think about that because it's not in your psyche yet. It's not impacting you yet. The other thing is the number of videos. So every day, this number's wrong, it's growing now, it's about 200,000 videos every day being uploaded. Because Chinese love not just to watch video, but to share video. And a good many of those videos will be where they've travelled to, destinations they've looked at, places they've visited. And we talk about the NBN here in Australia and connecting all of these 3.5 million businesses. Well, I'm afraid we've got 364 million broadband users in China today. Why is that important? It's very important for you guys to think about because it creates a very rich experience. So if you use video in your promotions online in China, predominantly they're a good experience. I can watch fast video. Therefore, I don't need to use the text-based websites of the past. I can become more adventurous with how I can appeal to people. We have this thing called QQ. Now, QQ is a little bit like MSN, so I can chat to people. But at any one time, there's over 100 million people using that chatting session. Phenomenal. And people told me, they said no one in China buys online. They use cash. It's a cash economy. Well, absolute rubbish. 30% growth in 2010, 23% growth last year. Chinese in Beijing have an average of 3 credit cards per capita. Wow. Now there's a perception you've just broken. So when you think about creating a product, and I know we've talked about products and things, you must be able to make that product affordable, yes, but accessible. Accessible to the markets you're trying to appeal to. So e-commerce is certainly a way that you need to approach your non-traditional markets. The other thing which is interesting is the amount of access smartphones have. So in China, for example, more people than not will access the internet via a phone or a non-PC device. So a lot of the people come to me and say, can you design my website for China? Can you rewrite my English website and make it available because I want to reach those Chinese people? Forget it. Get a website and put it on a phone. Create an application. Everybody is accessing the internet via a smartphone. So if you're creating a website today, you've missed the great bulk of people accessing the internet. So mobile, sometimes only mobile, is the way you should be reaching that Chinese audience. And there used to be this thing called Google. Google's pretty unfamiliar to me because it doesn't exist in China. So a lot of you will talk about, search marketing. I'll buy some keywords, paid search, SEM. Well, that's great, except it only has a very small percentage of use in China. There's another thing called Baidu. So if you want to reach the Chinese traveller via search marketing, well then you need to change the way you do it. Clearly, then Baidu is the obvious choice. So just a couple of interesting facts I want to put out there before I talk about social media. And these are just tips. You can apply these same tips to what you're doing with Facebook today or Twitter today. You just need to apply a different context. The first thing you need to do is listen. What are people saying about you? What are people saying about your competitors? Because unless you know what they're saying, then how do you know how to talk to them? And this is not just a digital thing, this is a human thing. You can't go to a party, start a dialogue, and not listen to what people are saying. So it's the same in the digital world with social media. Understand them. Now we've talked a little bit about China on the peripheral, and one of the things that struck with me was when people travel to Australia, they come for an experience. We've heard that a number of times. But the type of definition of experience is quite different. So when I think about a traveller from China, the experience is not necessarily a cultural experience. The experience is obtaining the photo that I can use when I go back to Beijing or Shanghai and show my friends and colleagues. That's my experience. So when you're starting to think about how you market and productize your tour and your destination, you've got to think of it in ways of your target audience and not in the ways that you consider for another audience. You've also got to think about the way people engage with your destination and your tour. Because when they go back to their home territories, they're going to be sharing a lot of information about this stuff. So just try and understand them as much as you can. The other thing is, what do people respond to? Because some people will respond to a cheap offer. Some people will respond to a free promotion. So be very clear about the type of incentives that the type of audiences you're talking to will respond to. They don't all work for the same sort of groups. Be visible. So all of you that have Facebook and Twitter, I'm sorry, you're not visible. So if you want to be visible to a certain audience that you want to target, then you must be on the places that they visit. It's just like the last speaker spoke a while ago about the OTAs. If you're trying to look at operators to help you, you're going to be talking to C-Trip and CITS and CYTS, those type of OTAs to help you bring them into Australia. So just be in the right places. I've got a lot of information on social currency. And I guess, the easiest way to get Chinese to do anything is give them money. So, with that psyche in mind, vouchers are great. So if you want to talk to a Chinese or an Asian visitor and incent them to do something, well, then give them something free. That's a great way. The next thing, which is quite interesting, is ego. Because in that part of the world, if you give someone an opportunity to become famous, they'll do stuff. And that might be having a special blogger, a guest blogger, so to speak, come to your tour on the condition they write a journal. And that journal is written in, say, Chinese and then published in a Chinese blog or a Chinese Twitter. So start thinking more laterally about how you're going to use incentives, when you're going to use incentives, because these are the things that are going to make a difference. It's not just about creating noise. Anyone can create noise. It's about creating the right noise. And I guess, authentic and transparent. I'm a marketer, so everyone knows I'm not authentic and transparent. But you're tour operators. Now, the research shows us that in China, there's a 2-to-1 trust factor, which means if I tell someone online, Chinese are twice as likely to believe it than Western audiences. Fantastic for marketing. There's a lot of social reasons about why people trust in China more than the West. So you don't want to undermine that trust. You don't want to create a brand that takes liberties. And then when they get here, discover that it wasn't what they thought it was. Then they go back, and then they're very active because their friends are trusting what they're saying about your tour or your hotel or your destination. And I guess the other thing to remember is this is a very sophisticated group of people. The Chinese, sometimes, North Asia, the dumb tourists, the group tours. These guys are now very intelligent, sophisticated travellers. So it's a perception I want to change. They research, they go online, they listen to what people say to them. Therefore, if you can get into that sort of psyche and you can have your good name, your good products out there, you're going to have a greater sphere of influence than you will in Western markets. And I just put a couple of examples up. You really want to start engaging with your tourists from the East. You don't want to and I hear all the federal levels and the state levels doing workshops, and that's absolutely critical. But as tour operators, as destinations, you want to create your voice now. Because I can assure you in China right now, every country in the world has identified China as the #1 outbound market for them. And they're investing heavily, not just in creating a Twitter-like voice, but they're creating forums, they're creating communities, they're creating dialogue with these guests. Because if you don't have point of presence, a mind share, then you're not even in the consideration. And the other thing is, you can't just have an account. There's no good just creating a Weibo account and doing nothing with it. It's about being active. So we encourage, we work with a lot of destinations that have a Weibo account. And it's not about pushing content to somebody. It's not like it's a PR channel. This is a conversation you've got to occur. And again, think about the analogy. If you're in your friends or in a party setting, you're not just going to have one person sit there and one person talk at them, unless you're married, right? It's about having a discourse. Okay, so create conversations that are meaningful, respectful, have a dialogue, and that's just human nature. Invite your guests, and again, I've heard of some really clever ways of getting email addresses, like send me your photos, and I get your email address and I can start blasting you with spam. These are clever ways, but some of the things you might want to use is invite some of your members on the tours to write guest posts on your blog. If they're from China or from other countries, get them to write it in their language, and then you can syndicate it in places in their countries to amplify that message. And I guess one of the things that brings me back to is, well, how do I know what people are saying? So our company, we developed this thing called social media analytics. And what this really is a technology for understanding much more about what people say and think. So we created this technology that doesn't just look at Facebook and Twitter, It looks at about 2 million sites every day. It looks for comments and reviews and postings. So for example, if I was working with a particular destination like Darwin, I'd set the technology up and I would start listening. First thing I'm going to do is find out what people are saying about this destination. And like I said, it's not just listening on one channel, it's listening across all digital channels. And the good thing about that is I can see a volume. So what is the volume of conversations about a particular destination? And that gives me a baseline. Because if you do a campaign and the volume doesn't change, well then you want to go back to your agency and say, what happened? Or if there's a crisis, someone said something really bad, well then you can see changes in fluctuation. This is one thing to look at. The next thing to look at is, well, within that daily volume, what are people saying? So what we can do is I can say, people talking about Darwin are also talking about other things. So I can drill down now into the conversations about Darwin and maybe look at the different tours. So I can start to get much deeper insights about the level of activity on particular topics. The next thing is, I can even look at where the geography is. So I can say, where are people talking about Darwin? So I can see that in different parts of the world, there's different levels of activity about my city, Darwin. Why? Because this may be an interesting thing if you're going to market. Then I can say, well, let's just look about the negative stuff. So where do people write about Darwin in a negative way or a positive way? Because then I can start targeting messages now that really address those concerns or amplify those positive things. And the other thing is, I may be interested in the channel in which people are using to talk about Darwin. Are they using Twitter, because they're in North America, or Facebook? Are they using Sina Weibo, because they're sitting in China? Or Dom, because they're in Korea? So I can start to identify now the channel and media that people are using to communicate about my tour or destination. Why is that important? Well, lots of reasons. Particularly if I'm going to be spending money as a marketing, to build my brand, I can now identify very specifically where people are talking about my destination or tour. The other thing which is really interesting is I can identify the author. So not only do I know where they are writing, what they're writing about, I know who they are. Well, that's really scary. But as a marketer, that might be really valuable, because if they're writing lots of really good stuff about Darwin, I may want to reach out and say, hey, Mr. Key Opinion Leader, let me help you. And why would you do that? Well, these fans suddenly become fanatics. They start writing more. They start using more imagery. They start talking about how great you are. On the other hand, if you have someone that's writing really bad stuff, it might be a competitor. You might want to reach out to them on a different reason. So these are just, and there's a lot of other stuff you can look at. Because the other thing which is really interesting when you look at the author stuff is how many males to females. What's the age demographic? And as Anna talked about, you may not want everybody from China to come to Darwin. So you may want to just start micro-segmenting the types of people you want to come to Darwin and talking to them. Okay, so it just makes it an interesting thing to consider. Everything you write on the internet is searchable, it's definitely usable by marketers, and it certainly will be. So I just wanted to highlight some technologies that you should be considering in terms of your social media strategy. Don't go out there and start randomly writing stuff everywhere, because it's going to be effectively useless. And the other really interesting thing about this stuff now is, in real time, I can say, using social media, I'm interested in certain attributes around Darwin. So for example, if I say, well, from the Darwin perspective, I'm interested in what people think about the service qualities, the affordability, the transport usage. So I can start measuring that against places like Cairns or Sydney. So using social media now as a proxy for research, and remembering we're using millions of sites and millions of conversations, I can start to understand very clearly how I rank and measure against other potential tours or destinations or things. Really cool stuff, eh? So a couple of parting thoughts. You need to understand much more about your consumer groups that you're trying to attract. Absolutely. Once you understand who you're trying to attract, you need to understand how to talk to them. Once you understand how to talk to them, what tone of voice, then you need to understand where they live digitally and then have plans that are used effectively to do it. And lastly, you need to measure it. So there's no point in saying, I'm going to write 15 posts on Twitter or Sina Weibo, because if you don't know why you're doing it, how do you know if you're actually doing the right thing? So set yourself some key measures. And the number of fans and followers is not a key measure. Although most people say, oh, I've got to have 10,000 fans on my Twitter account. I say ridiculous. It doesn't matter. I can buy you 10,000 fans on Twitter. So you've got to look at things that make sense to your business and then apply those things. I've got us back on time. Okay, if you want the slide presentation, please email me. That's my way of getting your email address. And you've got all my other social details there. So please talk to me and Anna after the session. Thank you very much.